Education is a way to cultivate individuals with moral integrity, knowledge, skill, and capability to become a functional and productive member of the society. However, the country of the Philippines is producing counterproductive results, especially in the recent years.
The Philippines is in a learning crisis.
Kailangan mag-declare na tayo ng education crisis para matutukan natin ito.
The Philippines has one of the highest number of dropouts in ASEAN. 1.4 million of youth are out of school. The significant decline in the quality of Philippine education is specifically apparent in elementary and secondary levels.
Batayan ang National Achievement Test o NAT para sa mga gagraduate na estudyante kung gaano na sila kahanda para sa high school at sa kolehiyo.
A huge portion of the students' population failed to even reach the average score in NAT and NCAE. When PISA 2018 was conducted, it thoroughly exhibited the outstanding disparity between Filipino students and those who were subjected to the international standards. In reading literacy, OECD countries had an average score of 487 points, while the Philippines on the other hand scored 340 points. In mathematics, OECD countries still performed better by reaching an average score of 489 points, while the Philippines scored 353 points. OECD countries also performed better than the Philippines in science by scoring 489 points, which is a few points higher than the Philippines' 357. So how exactly did we get here?
Filipinos killed in the intensive artillery fire by the Japs. The enemy tortured and murdered civilians, refusing to allow them safe passage out of the walled city.
The current state of the Philippine education system is heavily rooted in its vast history with colonial empires. It is a byproduct of the country's historical struggles. During the first phase of the Spanish colonization, most native Filipinos were not allowed to receive the same education that Spaniards are receiving. They were treated as essentially servants, labor workers, and a second-rate citizen even within the jurisdiction of their own lands. However, when the second phase arrived, particularly global changes caused by specific major events such as the introduction of the Suez Canal, the French Revolution, and the opening of the Philippines to world trades and commerce, created an opportunity for various ilustrados to educate themselves and their children in European nations. Education during Spanish colonization were selective. Although the Spanish monarch implemented the educational decree of 1863 in order to reform their selective colonial Philippine education system and make it more accessible to the masses, it was merely done for the sake of cultivating individuals to become clerks and officials under the Spanish rule. On November 10, 1900, the Philippine Commission reported to the U.S. War Department the state of education that were established by the Spaniards. This report entails various critical points that became the catalyst for the inadequacy of the education system. First, the schools lacked the necessary facilities to mold the proper learning environment. It was even mentioned that it wasn't unusual to see classrooms where some students does not have any chair to sit on. Second, quality education was concentrated in honing the capability of selective individuals rather than focusing on the mass, therefore creating a selective form of education. Lastly, educators were not trained enough or compensated enough. The report even mentioned that they are housed in unsanitary places. It is somehow ironic that the current state of the education system that we have right now is suffering from the exact same issues that they had during the Spanish colonization era.
Pasyon ang pagiging guro, pero may sikmura yan may pamilya yan na pinapakain.
Nagtatrabaho ang guro mula umaga hanggang gabi, ngunit hindi sapat ang benepisyong natatanggap.
When Spain left the country, the United States of America became the new colonizer. The invasion of the Philippines is one of the first global military campaigns that the United States instigated in the 20th century. Unlike the previous colonizer, the United States of America put immense importance on education, or what Benjamin Justice considered as imperial education. This is a form of education forced upon the Filipinos at the end of a gun, while the colonizer claims that they have reached the pinnacle of freedom and rationalism. The Americans used education as a way to unify the Filipino natives. They taught them American geography, history, culture, and language. The American education exponentially increases the literacy and knowledge of the Filipinos while slowly diminishing nationalism.
Its democratic system of government is patterned largely after that of the United States. The public schools, which are probably the most important contribution of the United States to the development of the modern Philippines.
The remnants of this phenomenon are still apparent even today. Many individuals possess the colonial mentality. For instance, some believe that being able to speak the English language means one is more intelligent than others. Foreign brands, especially the Western products, are also more attractive in their eyes than the local products. This results in consequences validates the fact that the American imperial education is a successful colonial instrument. But then, the Japanese arrive.
This is home movie footage of pre-war Manila. As the capital of a U.S. territory, it's infused with American style, from Western clothes to neon glitz. But when the Allies return to wrestle it back from the Japanese, it's a different city.
I've got a real scoop for you. Manila has just been bombed. In fact, right now it is being bombed.
Of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion.
On December 8, 1941, 10 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese military invaded the Philippines.
The Japanese invasion of the Philippines was conducted on schedule.
During this military campaign, the Filipinos fought side by side with the Americans. The Japanese military destroyed public schools, buildings, books, and materials. They tried to remove the American influence in the country by prohibiting the usage of the English language and by advocating ultranationalism. The Japanese occupation ended on September 2, 1945 when they were defeated by an army led by General MacArthur. On July 4, 1946, the United States of America formally recognized the independence of the Philippines through the enactment of the Tidings-McDuffie Law, or the Philippine Independence Act. The U.S. surrendered its sovereignty over the country.
I am authorized and directed by the President of the United States to proclaim the independence of the Philippines as a separate and self-governing nation.
The total liberation of the country from its colonizers quickly led to rapid economic growth. The Philippine population and urbanization increased exponentially. As a result, the demand for higher and greater social services also increased. Amidst the apparent success they were experiencing, one thing became clear. The current state of the public education system will never be able to capitalize on the rapid economic growth, fulfill the demand for social services, and accommodate the demand of the rising population. The Joint Committee of Congress on Educational Reform understood the vitality of the situation. Hence, they submitted a report stating that the Philippine public education system is in crisis. The committee proposed a solution, including the recommendation for a whole day of school sessions and the addition of 1 year in basic education. Unfortunately, these proposals did not materialize. As we can see, the education crisis that plagues the Philippines culturally stems from the tradition of education the colonizers brought into our lands. We identified earlier that most issues faced by the Philippines during the Spanish colonization era is similar to some issues we are currently facing, such as the undercompensation of the educators and the insufficient facilities, tools, and materials.
Nakasulat dun sa isang kalye, Cory Aquino, isang bala ka lang. Hindi ako natatakot, ang sagot ko dyan ay Ferdinand Marcos, isang balota ka lang.
The rise to the power of the Aquino administration after the Pope Marcos dictatorship led to various positive changes in the education system. For instance, the idea that education is a right and not a privilege were encouraged. During former President Cory Aquino's term, enrollees in elementary and secondary level of education increased. This became possible due to the 1987 Constitution, in which it was mandated that secondary education must be free for all. Now, although I have mentioned that the mandate of the 1987 Constitution allowed the reinforcement of the idea of education being a right more than a privilege, I would argue that due to some issues, the current state of the education system is still selective. Why do I say that? Consider this.
Upang ipagbatid sa inyo
na kami po ay labis na pinagtrabaho ng nakaraang taon mula po June 1 hanggang July 10. Kami po ay sobra at labis na pinagtrabaho na umabot po sa 13 buwan ng nakaraang taon. Hanggang sa ngayon po, nagbukas na naman ang panibagong taon. Pero po, yung OT pay namin, yung ating 77 and service credits na inaasahan po na maibigay sa amin ang kompensasyon, ay hindi pa rin po namin ito natatanggap.
Ilang araw na lamang, Pasko na, subalit hindi damang-dama ng mga guro ng bayan ang darating na Kapaskuhan dahil sa patuloy na pagtalikod ng ating gobyerno, ng mismong ahensya na dapat ay kumikilala sa mga karapatan at benepisyong dapat ay tinatamasa nating mga guro ng bayan. Pangunahin dito ang patuloy na pagtalikod sa kanyang pangako na itaas ang aumento at sahod ng mga teachers at ng iba pang mga maliliit na kawani sa sektor ng edukasyon.
Dahil sa palaging kakapusan ng budget, so kulang yung classroom, kulang yung teacher, lumalaki ang populasyon, talagang hindi makahabol, hindi makaangkop yung bilang ng mga guro sa bilang ng mga estudyante.
Public school educators are often not compensated enough in terms of salary and other benefits. This circumstance, even though it may not include every single educators, can discourage some of them and kill their enthusiasm to impart knowledge, hence decreasing the quality of education. In addition, the lack of necessary facilities and materials in some public schools can also lower the quality of education. This is precisely the reason why some people still patronize private institutions. They have this connotation that quality of education is more certified in this institution. According to the data reported by QS, there are top 15 best universities in the Philippines. One thing to note in this list is the fact that there are only 3 public universities included in the top 15, and only those who possess a relatively stable and higher income can usually afford the education being offered by this private institution. Due to these considerations, we can definitely make an argument that education, at least quality education, is still a privilege. It should be obvious by now that policymaking is a huge contributing factor in resolving the education crisis.
Kulang kasi yung knowledge nila pag walang Philippine history. Kasi dapat number 1 nga yan, dapat yung Philippine history sa atin para nalalaman nga natin yung nangyayari sa bansa natin, yung mga nakaraan, tsaka sa kasalukuyan.
Ano mangyayari sa mga mamamayan mo ngayon? Puro fake news na lang. Hindi ba? So, bata pa lang, kung hindi mo ituturo yung ating nakaraan sa mga bata, wala silang kinabukasan. So, look at what's happening na sa social media.
In 2014, Philippine history was removed from the curriculum of high school students. This decision became a controversial issue.
Ang tanong ay, ang 3 Catholic priests na sina Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora na hinatulan ng kamatayan noong panahon ng Kastila ay mas kilala sa tawag na blank.
Pwede po pakiulat ng mga names?
Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora.
Marjo! Hindi, wait lang. Yung nakalimutan ko yung mga apelyado. Wait lang po, mahina po talaga ako sa...
I am so sorry, Kai. Chance to steal. Yeah.
Majoha? Or...
Majoha.
Majoha?
Majoha ba ako? Majoha, sure ka na ba?
Opo.
Majoha is wrong. Actually, it's Gomburza.
In one of the episodes of Pinoy Big Brother, the housemates' general knowledge of the history of the Philippines was challenged. Some of them were not able to answer even the rudimentary history questions. Netizens then argued that this is the direct consequence of removing Philippine history from the curriculum at the secondary level. The history of the country is a huge part of the identity of its citizens. It cultivates general awareness, understanding, appreciation of one's culture and homeland, and nationalism. Therefore, we can definitely say that the impact of the removal of the Philippine history in secondary education may be greater than what they expected. The issue of colonial mentality may even heighten due to this. As we have discussed earlier, the presence of US culture has been totally assimilated into the Filipino society. They use their language on day-to-day basis, and many of them patronize Western products or anything foreign. We can also identify instances where some people are discriminated against and bullied for lacking the capabilities to speak English proficiently. In correlation to this matter, the issue of brain drain is also something that hinders the overall growth of the country. Due to the incapacity of the Philippines to provide sensible compensation for workers, some capable individuals decide to allow other nations to utilize their skills and talents in exchange for higher compensation.
How are you? I'm tired. How are you?
These factors immensely prove that the Philippines is certainly undergoing a learning and education crisis that has been implanted due to colonialism, culture, and the government's negligence and incompetency. Democracy is the power that liberated us from the colonizers, but it is also the tool being utilized by corrupt politicians to exploit the education crisis. Possessing the capacity to choose the right leaders requires education. A small educated population may not have the power to surpass the authority and power of seated officials that hinders the country's growth. A big population of educated masses can move even mountains. Education is our main weapon. If you are privileged enough to be educated, use it to better yourself, your fellow citizens, and the country itself. Let's use our knowledge to instigate the social change that we need. We have suffered enough.